Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. So I want to talk a bit about survival gear today, and as many people know, I love my survival gear. I'm constantly pushing the envelope with some of the things I review on my channel, so I don't want people to think this is some kind of gear-hating, technophobic rant, as that clearly would be contradictory to a lot of the stuff that I've been putting out as of late in particular. But what prompted me to make this video is the sheer amount of gear available nowadays. It seems to be growing exponentially as the survivalist and prepper markets expand. There's more and more gear at our disposal, and it can be very hard for people who are just getting into this in deciphering what exactly they need and what they don't need. It's easy to be overwhelmed and to think that you don't have a hope in hell in surviving if you don't have the latest and greatest gear. Technological sophistication is most definitely a factor in terms of survivability. But there's a couple other factors, namely familiarity and skill, which are as important when determining your odds at surviving any particular situation you might find yourself in. In fact, too much gear can be counterproductive and almost gluttonous in the sense it can promote indecisiveness, and it'll actually weaken your ability to gain a familiarity with your gear. So let's talk a bit more about that. I want to first present to you a Native American legend about a man who canoed to an island, and I guess he broke his paddle along the way or something to that effect. And while he was on this island, it was just an island that was in abundance in very rare hardwoods, and so he was really excited that he was able to. It sucked that he had broke his paddle, but of course he had all these nice trees to make paddles from. So what he did was he made a paddle, and of course once he was almost done finishing that paddle, he seen another tree which was just a little bit better than that other paddle, and he realized that he was getting a little short on food and that he only had so much time to get back to his destination. But he said, okay, well, maybe I can make another one. And this went on, and he kept finding more and more trees that were better and better, so he eventually died on the island of exhaustion because essentially the moral of the story is you can't have too much stuff. Sometimes it's good to just settle on something and master it. There is a place for simplicity and minimalism while embracing the new technology that's out there. My friend Sylvain Bushcraft, who's done some videos with me in the past, his gear is not the most state-of-the-art, it's not the most ergonomic, it's definitely quality gear. He takes a lot of time and does a lot of research into getting each piece of gear he has. But the thing is, he only typically has one of each of these things. He doesn't really get too much into the one is none, two is one factor, which I think is a little overblown. I think there's a certain amount of redundancy needed for something, but sometimes I just think two is too many. I mean, the more you carry out in the field, the more you have to maintain. It's very hard to keep things organized in the field. The more gear you have, it's just it's great to have that amount of firepower out there, but I find that I end up just spending a lot of my time organizing stuff, making sure I know where it is. And even if you do have a great compartmentalized system, which is modular or whatever, you still have to take a lot of time to organize all that stuff in all its corresponding compartments. And unless you're the urban prepper who has a knack for that sort of thing, organization and whatnot, then you might find yourself overwhelmed. I, for one, feel overwhelmed when I bring too much gear into the field, and I've done this before, and what happens, I just don't end up using it because you don't really have a lot of time when you're out in the bush. That's what people don't really realize, is that time is very limited. I find that it's very hard to keep things organized because it takes so long to do everything, like just to get water, to set up a shelter, to cook food on a fire, to catch food even, that's going to take a long time. So you don't really have time to mess with a lot of different gear. Yes, it can enhance your experience and enhance your capabilities out there in the field, but you can take too much, and sometimes it can just be counterproductive to have too much. A person only has 2 arms, 10 fingers, and 1 brain, so you can only do so much. 10 knives is not going to serve you a whole lot of purpose. Just like having too many firearms is, come the time for a firefight, are you going to be able to just settle on one particular gun? Or are you going to be indecisive about it due to having so many options? So sometimes having too many options is not a good thing. I mean, I could imagine being one of the more popular gear review channels on YouTube who probably just have basements full of stuff. And I mean, I have a lot of gear compared to the average person. I have just too much gear almost as is, and a part of me really wants to just go minimalist, but at the same time, I have the channel and I want to keep pushing the envelope with the gear reviews and the technology, and I'm all about, human innovation and creativity and the startups and whatnot, so I'm constantly into that, but a part of me just wants to, sort of relinquish all that stuff and go back to basics. And at some point I may just sell a lot of it and just get back to basics, because really it can really get convoluted for a person who's just looking at all of this gear out there. And there's so many knives out there. Like, if you think like 10 years ago even, there wasn't, I'd say, probably a quarter of the options of knives as there is now. And on the one hand, that's great, because there's so many choices, there's a knife for every particular task, but nowadays there's just so many. The market's quite saturated right now, and in order to stand out, something has to be significantly different. So it's not the value of your gear that matters so much, the price point, if you will, it's the experience you have with it. You don't need to be a knife expert per se to understand all the nuances and capabilities of said knife. So, I mean, you can have a person who had that same old buck 50, I think it is, for 10, 15 years, and that's the only knife he's ever used. He knows that knife inside and out. It may be wearing a little thin, but at the same time, I would trust that guy to be more competent with that knife that he's used for 15 years than somebody who got a knife which was 10 times more expensive and hasn't put any use in it in the field, even if they were a knife expert, because chances are that guy knows that knife so well. And I mean, what is a knife expert really? I guess knife fighting, or certain bushcrafting skills, stuff like that, and batoning skills or feather stick skills, whatever. But I doubt the advantage is going to be that profound, especially like I would put my money on the guy who has put 10 years in with the crappy SKS rifle. And of course, we know it's not crappy, it's a good rifle, it's a stand-up rifle. But, I would put my money on a guy who's trained with his SKS for 10 years and he's maintained it and he knows every aspect of what it's capable of, compared to somebody who, say, just got a Tavor for their birthday and took it out to the range a couple times. I would totally entrust the guy with the SKS in a gunfight any day of the week. And that's not just to, I'm not saying anything about the firearms in particular, so please don't challenge me on that. I'm just using that as an example of where you have the inferior technology, but you have greater familiarity with it, compared to superior technology, lack of familiarity, even with experience. So on some hands, experience and familiarity correspond. So you have those three variables. You have experience, you have familiarity, and you have the level of technological sophistication. I'm sure there's a few more in there that I'm not necessarily considering. Obviously, the circumstances and the conditions that you're using it in are going to be exceptionally important. We must consider the law of diminishing returns. So if anybody's not familiar with that, what that is, that means that the more effort you put into a task, if we want to use tasks as an example, or the more money you spend on a given product, the less and less you get. So the difference between a rifle and a handmade primitive bow and arrow is huge. It's night and day. I mean, you can argue it all you want. A rifle, no matter what rifle it is, as long as it's not like a muzzle loading musket or something like that, is superior to, and even that would still probably arguably be superior on some levels. But let's not start a debate about that. What I'm trying to say is the technological jump from bow and arrow to firearm or rifle in particular is very great in magnitude. It's a whole nother level. Yet the cheapest rifle, like the Mosin Nagant or something like that, compared to the Tavor or something, a bit more advanced, is much smaller than that jump from the bow to the rifle. So that's the law of diminishing returns right there. The more you invest over like $500 in a knife, you're getting less and less. Let's say you own a K-bar knife. So, obviously there's different classes of knives. There's bushcrafting knives, survival knives, combat knives, and stuff like that. But let's just say for combat knives, the K-bar is, maybe 80% as good of a knife as you're going to get. So you're going to end up spending twice as much as the K-bar to get maybe to 85%. You're going to spend 3 times as much as the K-bar just to get to 95%. And to get the best knife on the market, you're probably going to be spending 10 times as much. So that's what the law of diminishing returns is. You're getting less and less for your dollar the more and more you spend. And everybody wants that edge. That's why a lot of eccentric people, and myself included when possible, want to get the best gear. And I think you should get the best gear if you can afford it, and it's not going to break your bank or anything like that. But I do think you should try to gain as much familiarity with that piece of gear. So get the best piece of gear and stick with it and work with that and just deal with just that, as opposed to diversifying your resources too much and not gaining any mastery over one particular thing. And I can't emphasize that point enough that I'm not anti-technology or anti-gear. I think if you can get top-of-the-line, state-of-the-art gear, all the more power to you. And I'm not like one of these people who's, wants to keep it traditionalist and regressive, like some kind of Luddite, technophobe, Amish type person who wants to stay at a certain level of technological development. I don't believe that we have to do that, especially if you look at what some people spend on crap that they're never going to need, and I say crap, it's all relative, but I'm talking about things that have absolutely no functional value whatsoever. People invest thousands upon thousands of dollars and it's never questioned. So, for us to question survivalists and preppers for buying $1,000 mono walker, which isn't even much considering what you're getting for that, that's a great unit. That's a one-of-a-kind type thing. That's why I reviewed it. I also have a couple of other items that I'm going to be reviewing coming up, which are similar. They have a high price point, but you're getting a lot of bang for your buck. So yes, there is a place for big spending in preparedness in survival, but at the same time, I would still say that, what you have, if you can master that, if that's all you have, the guy who has the $1,000 knife is not going to have much of an edge over the guy with a $50 knife. When it comes down to familiarity and skill, those two things are going to win most of the time. But like I say, there are those huge leaps in technology which have to be considered. The best bow on the market still arguably is not as good as the crappiest rifle. You could argue that if you want, but I'm just talking about the levels of technology and how it progresses. I feel a little overwhelmed too when I see so much gear on the market today, and it's great that all these people are doing these gear reviews. Sometimes I just feel as though I want to get rid of all my stuff because there's so much power in being minimalist and familiar. And I really do almost envy the sentimentality that my friend the Sylvain Boer has with his gear, because he has such an intimate relationship with each piece of kit that he owns. It's his one knife, it's his one backpack, it's his one fire steel that he has a leather holster made for, just things like that. You really get to know it. It becomes a part of you, almost an extension of your body in a sense. So I envy that in a way, that as much as I have more technology and firepower in theory, I question whether or not, which one of us really does have the upper hand when it comes to battling the elements. So let me know what you guys think about this. I look forward to hearing your comments on the matter. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. It always helps out the channel. Thanks for watching. Canadian Prepper out. Check out the Canadian Preppers Network blog, an excellent resource for survivalists and preppers.